Buongiorno. Hello. Welcome to Angela's Kitchen. I'm Angela and this is my kitchen. Today we're going to prepare two hearty Italian soups. One will be made with lentils and we will be using a chicken stock. The other will be Great Northern beans or white kidney beans, and we will then be using a beef stock. First we're going to do our lentil soup. I want you to notice that the lentils and the beef are in bowls of water. The lentils have been sitting here about an hour and a half, and this is to absorb some of the moisture back into the beans to begin to reconstitute it prior to cooking. The Great Northern beans, or the white beans, however, have been sitting overnight. You'll notice they almost double in size, and believe it or not, this is only 1 cup of lentils and 1 cup of beans. Now, in order to prepare our lentil soup, we are going to need a 4 or 5 quart pot. For long cooking soups, I prefer the heavy aluminum pots because sometimes when the flame gets a wee bit too high, if you use porcelain or a thin aluminum, the beans tend to stick at the bottom of the pot. Do not allow that to happen. We also will need a colander. We're going to drain our lentils into the colander and then transfer the lentils into the pot. But before we do that, if you'd like to look at what I'm doing here, I have the little hulls that come to the surface, and I'm going to remove those because they blend nothing to the soup. It won't matter if they stay, but anything that floats to the top you can remove very easily with a spoon. Now, let's go to the sink, and we're going to drain the lentils into the colander. We're then going to transfer the lentils into the 4 or 5 quart heavy aluminum pot preferably, but other pots are equally as good if you're very careful that the simmering remains at simmer and doesn't go higher so that you don't have scorching. Now for the ingredients that we will need. This was 1 cup of lentils, or about a ½ pound when you buy the whole bag. You usually get it in the pound, so you only use half, and this will serve about 4 people. Then we will need about 4½ cups of chicken stock. Now in our earlier tape we prepared chicken stock for you and made larger quantities so that we could very easily then use it in other recipes as we're going to do today. So this is about 4½ cups of stock that we have here. We have 1 carrot which has been chopped, 1 large stalk of celery also chopped, 1 small onion minced, 1 clove of garlic minced, and if you're using the minced garlic that they sell commercially, about a ½ teaspoon would be enough. Here we have 3 plum tomatoes that have been diced. Now you know what plum tomatoes are. They're the long tomatoes that you see in the Italian section or in the international section of your supermarkets. Also, if you're lucky enough, in the summertime especially, they sell your plum tomatoes this way, and these make delicious sauces. We also will need 1/4 cup of oil, 1 tablespoon fresh parsley. Again, if you're using dry parsley, just use a ½ teaspoon because in order to reconstitute itself, you don't want a whole tablespoon because you're going to have an awful lot of parsley. This is 1 tablespoon of basil, fresh basil. Again, if you're using the dry, a ½ teaspoon would be enough. This is 1/4 teaspoon of paprika, salt and pepper to taste. However, I am not adding salt today because our chicken stock already has the salt, pepper to taste, and these are croutons that we'll make. We're only going to use 3 tablespoons of our oil in the soup as it's cooking. The remainder we're going to use to garnish these croutons, and on these croutons we have a sprinkling of paprika and a sprinkling of oregano, which we float on top of the soup, and it's absolutely delicious. And here we have about a ½ pound of fresh spinach that I have cleaned. This was about a pound before all of the stems were removed. However, if you don't have the time to go shopping, you just come home from work, and in your a 10-ounce package of chopped spinach, that will be perfectly fine too. All right, let's go to the stove now. All right, here we are at the stove, and we're going to add our 4½ cups of chicken stock. Turn our heat to high. Each of these is 1 1/2 cups. And I have one in reserve in the event that I feel that it has become too dry. However, water can be added as well. All right, now this is on high. We're going to add our other ingredients. Here we have the carrot, celery, onion, garlic, tomato. Next comes our olive oil, and as I told you earlier, we're only going to use 3 tablespoons because we'll need the rest of it for the croutons. So it's 1, 2, 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Then we will add our paprika. We are not going to add our spinach and our parsley and basil until the end of cooking time, because of course that's not going to take very long, and we want the nice fresh taste of the spinach. Now this will take, once it boils, about 1 to 1½ hours to simmer. And once this boils, we'll cover it with the heavy lid, lower the heat to medium, and check it in a few minutes to see if it is boiling too rapidly, and then lower it even further. We're going to put about 1/2 tablespoon of olive oil at the base of this little pan and coat the bottom lightly with it. A napkin, paper towel will be fine. Then, these I've already prepared, but I want to show you how I do those that I had not prepared so you can see exactly how it's done. Then what I do is drizzle just a teeny bit of oil on each one of these. Now we're going to have some left over, obviously, because I've already done these. All right. And what we do is put a bit of paprika and a bit of, just about 1 time, of oregano. Then what we do is turn it over and turn it over completely and add a little more oil on the other side. Now this is all. We do not put paprika and oregano on both sides because otherwise it's going to be too much of the taste of oregano and paprika, and that really is going to kill it. We just want a delicate suggestion of both of those tastes, and the combination of these is really beautiful. What we do then is put them in a hot oven, let's say 400, for 5 minutes until it's toasted. I'm going to do that now. The oven is on, and I have it on 400. I'm going to put the croutons, time them for 5 minutes, test them at that time. If they're not toasty enough, I'll give them a little more time. Our lentil soup is boiling beautifully now. Really boiling rapidly. However, we don't want it to boil that rapidly. What we're going to do is lower the heat to about medium, cover it, and check it within a few minutes to see if it's not boiling too rapidly. Now this is going to simmer for about an hour and an hour and a half at the most, depending upon how quickly the lentils cook. You can taste if it doesn't bite back, if it's nice and soft, the center is nice and soft, then you know the lentils are cooked. Now since these have been soaked for an hour and a half, 2 hours already, pre-soaked, it should not take more than an hour. All right, this lentil soup has been cooking for about an hour and 15 minutes, and you notice that a lot of the stock has boiled down. I did not add salt, as I said, because there was salt in the stock. You can add your pepper whenever you want. This is for about 4 or 5 people, so you can give each person a turn. It's at this point, we have about 15 minutes more to go on this, and you could do this also at a half hour before the end of cooking time. At this time, we'll add our fresh parsley, the tablespoon of fresh parsley, the tablespoon of fresh basil. Again, if you're adding dry parsley or dry basil, it's just a half a teaspoon of each. And this is about 2 cups of clean spinach, or about a half a pound. I started with about a pound. By the time I finished it, it came down to about a half a pound or 2 cups. Now, remember, this is not etched in stone. If you have 3/4 of a pound or 1/4 of a pound, it doesn't matter. Again, you can use a whole package of frozen spinach, chopped spinach, which would be fine. This will really take only about 5 minutes to cook once I have the spinach down under where it's good and hot. And this with a piece of crusty Italian bread, hot bread, and a glass of wine, and voila, you've got a beautiful meal. Vegetarian meal, no meat, low calorie, very nourishing, and very satisfying. All right, I've got the spinach, as you see, sitting under the lentils. I am going to cover this now, give it about 5 minutes cooking time, and then our soup will be ready. All right, we've given our croutons about 6 minutes, and they're nice and toasty, and they're ready to go on top of our lentil soup. So here is your lentil soup. You notice it's a very thick soup with lots of vegetables. A beautiful dish for the non-vegetarian as well as for someone who's trying to cut down on his meat consumption, which we all are today. Let me spoon out a little of it here. This should feed 4, as you see, very, very generously, but with this size plate, I'm sure you could get 6, and it would be really more than enough. And you float a crouton in the center of it, and as you break into the crouton, it'll absorb the very lovely flavors of your lentil soup, and you'll have a very delicious morsel that you're chewing on. Buon appetito! Hello, here we are again. Now we're ready to make pasta in fagioli, which means pasta and beans. The beans that we're going to use are the Great Northern beans, and they usually come in a pound package. We're only going to use half of that, or half a pound, which equals about a cup. Now these beans have been soaking overnight, and you'll notice how they have absorbed so much water that they are that much larger than the dry bean. You see that? So a cup of beans really goes a long, long way. This was a staple among the poor people in Naples because it was an economical dish, and with the addition of pasta, it was a meal that stuck to your ribs. Again, we're going to use the 4 to 5 quart heavy aluminum pot for the same reasons that I cited before. It prevents scorching of the beans at the base. Now, if again, we'll make it easy for you. It's not going to be the same, but it's a reasonable facsimile. If you don't have time to take 2 hours to prepare the beans and to cook them for another 2 hours, you can get the cannellini, which are the same type beans, in your supermarket. However, I recommend that you try this first. This is only in an emergency. Now, as I look through here, you'll see that some of the hulls have come to the top again, as did in the lentil soup. And just scoot around and see if you find beans that are not perfect, such as this one. It has a little brown edge. You certainly don't want that. And here's another one that has a little brown on it, and they're very easily detected. All right, once you've done that, again, if you leave a few hulls, no matter. It's not going to hurt anything. It just won't have a bean inside. We're going to drain it in the colander. Transfer it into the 4 to 5 quart pot. This is a 5-quart pot. And I'm going to put this on the stove, but I'll be right back. We're going to use beef stock to make our pasta and fagioli. And you'll notice the beef stock is a golden color as opposed to the light lemon color of the chicken. This, of course, has a lot more tomato and the beef broth in it that has rendered this lovely color. In order to make pasta and fagioli, we, of course, are going to use pasta. Now, which pasta to use? Well, you have a broad spectrum of pasta, so long as it's not spaghetti or any fine pasta. Tubetti are very nice. Tubetti, all that means is little tubes. They're little macaronis that are cut into teeny tiny portions. That's nice. You can use elbow macaroni, but what I really like, because it tastes like homemade noodles, are the broad egg noodles, and that's what I have here, and we use only 4 ounces of that because this is to accommodate 4 to 5 people. This is all the pasta that you need in this dish. Again, we're going to need 1/4 cup of olive oil. This time we have 2 cloves of garlic, which we have minced. This is your celery. This again is 1 rib of celery. This is just a little less than a pound, which is the small can of plum tomatoes, which I have cut into rather large portions. I did not mince this. Here is some fresh basil, and I've chopped up a tablespoon of that. 1/2 teaspoon of the dry would be sufficient. This is your parsley, a tablespoon of fresh parsley. 1/2 teaspoon again would be sufficient. And we're going to use 1/2 teaspoon of oregano and 1/4 teaspoon of red crushed pepper, and this is what it looks like. And salt and pepper to taste. Again, I'm not adding salt because our broth has salt. We're using 4 1/2 cups of that broth and enough pepper for your particular taste. If you like your pasta fagioli a little hotter, a little spicier, you can add a little more of the red crushed pepper. If you don't care for it to be hot at all, eliminate it. It's not going to change the taste. It just adds a little interesting zing. Do not over-oregano anything. It seems that people who don't know Italian cooking just burden whatever they're cooking with oregano, that all you taste is oregano and you don't have a nice flavor at all. Would you join me at the stove? All right, your fagioli are in the pot. We're going to add 4 1/2 cups of beef stock. Again, I have 1 in reserve just in case the fagioli eat up too much of our liquid, which I tend to doubt since they were soaked overnight. Turn our heat to high, and we will add all of the ingredients, again, except for the fresh greens, which in this case are your parsley and your basil. Your 1/4 cup of olive oil, two cloves of garlic, one rib of celery, chopped, and they don't have to be small pieces, obviously. This is equal to about 5 plum tomatoes and the liquid that comes from the pan. But about one pound can of plum tomatoes is just about what you want. And again, we didn't mince these. We have them in rather large pieces. Add that to our soup. Then our 1/4 teaspoon of crushed red pepper. 1/2 teaspoon of oregano. And a couple of swirls on our freshly ground pepper. Give it a twirl. Isn't that festive looking? Pretty. And once it comes to a full boil, again I will lower the heat, cover it with our lid, and this will simmer for 2 hours. Now you'll notice that the stock has cooked down considerably. Also, although it looks liquid now, as it cools, it'll thicken. Now at this point, at the very end of cooking, I'm going to add the parsley and the basil just to give it the lovely flavor of these fresh greens. They really do not need to be cooked, so I'm not really going to give them any more time, as we did with the spinach, which of course needed to be cooked a little bit. Now at this point, I'm going to cover this, put it down to just warm, and then I have taken a 2-quart pot, as you see here, and I have filled it almost to the top, about 3/4 full, with water, and it is almost boiling. As soon as that water boils, I'm going to take my broad egg noodles and put them in the pot and not give them their full cooking time. I'm only going to give them 5 minutes. The reason for that being that since this is hot, once you verse your noodles into the soup, it'll continue cooking. So if you give it its full cooking time, it's going to be just a mishmash once it gets here. It's going to just fall apart. Whereas if you only give it 5 minutes, you'll still have your firm, beautiful noodles once you put it into your soup. All right, look at your pot here. The water is boiling. I'm going to put the egg noodles into the water. Wait until it reboils, and we can do that by putting the lid on. It'll reboil much faster. And I hear it. It's reboiling. I'm going to give it just 5 minutes. Now when that buzzer sounds, they will not be fully cooked. They will be very, very al dente, much more so than we would like. At that point, I'll drain it and put it into our soup. All right, our water is boiling rapidly. Our noodles are cooked. You hear the buzzer? Let's turn it off. And I'm going to go to the sink and pour this into a colander. We don't pour cold water into our noodles. Get some of that excess water out. And here our soup is simmering nicely. And we put our noodles into the soup. They are still firm. Now this is going to stand for about 5 minutes in order to allow the noodles to absorb the beautiful flavor of the broth. And then it'll be ready for serving. And here you have your pasta e fagioli. Now, if you like, you can add some Parmesano cheese. If you prefer, you can add Romano. I happen to like Parmigiano. You can also add it to your lentils. Again, all according to taste. And here we have our 2 dishes that we prepared today. Lenticchia con pollo di brodo, which is your lentil with your chicken broth, and pasta e fagioli con brodo di manzo, which is your pasta and beans with your beef broth. Buon appetito! Until next time, looking forward to seeing you again.